Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of our AMS webinar series. This is our July 2022 version. And today we're going to be talking about post-processing in our CAM products. It's an important topic. It's not very sexy, if you will, but it's a very, very important topic because this is where we really take your pretty pictures out to the machine tool. We'll talk in depth about various topics. We'll get into that in a minute, but Don, next slide, please. So before we get started, jumped into the details, a few housekeeping tips. We use your chat window for questions. You'll see that chat window that's pointed by that blue arrow. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please go ahead and input your questions there. I'll be monitoring it in the background, and we'll definitely make sure that your questions get answered. We also typically use the last 10 minutes for questions if we have time, but I would urge you strongly to do it interactively as the webinar is progressing. As usual, the recording of this webinar will be made available and sent to all the registrants once we get a chance to clean it up and make sure it's working okay. And for those of you who don't know me, let me introduce myself. My name is Joe Anand. I'm the product manager here. I'll be joined today by Don LaCourse, who's our senior application engineer, and he'll be actually running the demo and the webinar. So as far as the agenda is concerned, the topics that we're going to be talking about today, introduction to post-processing, some of the things that we've added in the 2022 release, some of the interesting and important things. And then we'll jump right into the common posting issues we see with users when they first get our product, or even if they are using our product, have been using it for a while. And that's a pretty in-depth topic. We'll talk about a few issues that people run into. And then we also are going to touch about how to edit your post-processor. We normally have not really talked about this much because it does involve a little bit of technical expertise on your part, but we will show you some simple things that you can do to make your life easier on the shop floor. Some of the other things that people have always asked us, so we've added that to the agenda. One is how do you add a tool change point? We'll show you how to do that. And then how to set up for cutter compensation. That's also a very often asked question to our support group. And then another important topic is the arc circle format. How do we adjust it? What are the errors that we commonly see? Things of that sort. And then we'll talk about how to post drill cycles as linear motions. This is also a very common question because some of the machines out there are pretty old and they do not handle drill cycles, and especially in rotated planes. So people want drill cycles to be output as linear segments, and there's a way to do it in our system. And then finally, the Programmable Post that we introduced in 2022. It's a pretty powerful tool. We'll touch upon it very briefly because it does involve a lot of, you need a lot of technical expertise to actually be able to create one. You need some Python programming Python programming expertise if you wanted to set something up. But we'll talk about it, so at least you're aware that it's available for you. And if you need us to, typically what we do is we work with the post. Some of the complex posts that we cannot handle with our legacy posts, we create programmable posts, and we'll talk about that. So anyway, so that's about the agenda. And Don, do you want to take over?
Hey, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be covering a lot of topics in post-processing, and so especially if you're a new user, you're going to want to tune in and come back and watch the recording after you get it, because we'll be going through it probably relatively quickly. So what I got on the screen here is how do I post-process in the current version of our plugins, version 2022. And we've actually made it a little bit easier in 2022 to post. There's not a whole lot of things you have to do. We're going to start on the left. there are post preferences, CAM preferences that are specific to post processing. So you want to take a visit there and just take a look at what's going on in that post processor dialog of the CAM preferences dialog. So you can obviously if you look at the top, we're going to be talking about some common issues. So I won't get into issues right here, but I'm just going to just briefly touch on the different dialogues. We'll be talking about this dialog in detail in a moment. But you can set your post preferences, your post file extensions, and some other things from this preferences dialog. In the middle image here, basically all of the post processes by default that you get when you load the product are loaded into this folder that you see here in this dialog, the folder to load post processor files from. That will point to the default post folder in your installation of the plugin. So it's good to know where that's at. If you need to drop a revised post in there, you can just drop it in there and it automatically show up in this current post processor list. And then also you can edit your post from here. There's an edit button, and then this little 3-dot button is to change the folder where the posts are located. And once, typically, when you first get the product, you won't have to mess with this because it'll default to a post. All you got to do is go to the pick post from the program tab, select the post you're going to use, and then in step 3, there's various ways to actually post your operation, and we'll touch upon that as well in the demo. Now, some common posting issues. I mentioned this dialog here on the left. If you go to the program tab in the CAM plugin, select post, you'll see the select post processor dialog. Again, I got highlighted in yellow. That's the default folder where your posts are by default when you load the product. So that's the location file of the folder that you see in the middle dialog here. If you look at this highlighted in blue string, that's a folder path. That's the same folder path over here in this dialog on the left. And you'll see in this graphic a number of post processors already listed here. The posts by default, they have a file extension of .spm for our legacy posts, and a .py for the a programmable post. And then over here on the right, obviously we see a machining job here with a example post defined. So we got a couple of 3 items down here that things that people run into. So the first thing is you want to make sure in this dialog on the left that you have the post type defined. In most cases, you'll be using what's called our legacy post. And this is the list of posts that you see here in this default path. In most cases, you'll be using one of those post processors, or you'll be starting out using one of those post processors. So make sure that you got it set to use legacy post so you can access all of our predefined posts that come with the product. Just one moment. Now, the next item here is I lost my post processor. We hear that a lot. Things can happen. This directory where it's pointing to your post processors, for some reason you could have changed it, or you could have a customized post and it's not showing up in your list and you can't find it. So basically you want to start from scratch, go to the program tab, select post, make sure you're using the correct post type, then check out this folder where you currently have the post, this dialog pointing to, okay? And what you can do is you can just highlight and copy this folder path and paste it into a file browser, press enter, and it'll take you to that folder location. Make sure your post definition file, if you want to keep it in this default location, make sure it's listed here. If you want to keep it in another location, such as on your desktop, or multiple users typically will have it on a shared drive in their internal network. So you just want to make sure that this path over here, and by picking the three little dot button there, make sure that it's pointing to the common folder where you have your post-processor files. And you should be able to, once you point it in the right folder, they will show up in this current post-processor list.
Yeah,
Now,
one of the things I want to point out is, this is the default folder that the product ships with. And so you're not necessarily locked into having all your posts in this folder. You can actually create a folder wherever you want. And like Don was saying, typically larger companies will put it in some sort of central drive where many users can access it. And that way you have control of your posts. You don't need to worry about all the other posts that we ship with. I think we ship with over almost 600 posts. So you're not cycling through each of those posts as you are programming. So I highly recommend setting up a post folder in a central location and always copying your post to that folder. I think, Don, you're going to talk about how to move posts around.
yep,
So
yep.
yeah, that's an important, I think that would be a good recommendation for all users.
Mm-hmm. And
Thanks,
then also just to add to that is it's not always a good thing to have your specific custom posts mixed in with all of the posts that are in our in our installation. Only because when you upgrade, you're not going to be in the same path anymore, and then you're going to lose track of where it's at. So the next third item over here on the right is I need to install a custom post. This is the same procedure as verifying that you are pointing in the right direction where your post is. So if we've supplied you with a customized post processor, one of these typically would be one of these posts in this list, maybe with a rev number on it. Like for this one here, we have Haas PMT-Rev1. That is a custom post that we supplied to a user that was common enough for us to add into our standard post list. So if you have a custom post from us, you can drop it into the default path. We recommend that you do put it in another location though. Just you can dump it onto your desktop and then use this dialog on the left and point the plugin to your desktop so it can find your posts and it will appear on the drop-down menu. And again, if you have any questions on any of these slides, just go ahead and ask us. We're going to be monitoring the questions in the background and we'll get to them.
Hey, Don, you're muted.
Unmuted.
What was the last thing you heard from me, Joe?
About the monitoring the questions. So
okay,
yeah, you can start with this.
Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so here's some additional posting issues that you might run into. In 2022, we introduced a new item in the toolpath, what we call the MOP folder. MOP stands for Machining Operation. So inside your Machining Operation folder, you have a number of icons. We introduced a new icon called G-code. And what that does is, if you look at the CAM preferences here in the middle dialog, there's a checkbox called Always Post-Process G-code during toolpath generation. What that means is whenever you generate, when you would generate the operation, you can have your G-code generate automatically, and it'll be saved with the file. So if you don't have this checked and you generate your G-code, this icon will flag just to let you know that the G-code was not auto-generated. So if you see this flag, as long as your folder itself is not flagged, if you see a flag on your folder, that means you need to regenerate it. If you just see a flag on the G-code icon, you can go into here and you can check this box to always post the G-code, or you can just ignore it if it's just one flag on the G-code item.
Actually, Don, if you uncheck it, we don't flag it.
Oh, okay.
Uncheck.
Okay.
Yeah, when you uncheck that, so by default, this is a new parameter that we have added in 2022, and by default, it'll be unchecked. And then if you see that if you do not have a post selected, and if you have that checked, then that's when the flag will show up. So
Okay. Okay. So another thing that users ask about is why isn't their G code displaying? Typically, when you right click on operation and post, your G code will pop up automatically. By default, it'll pop up in a notepad text file. So the notepad will pop up, and you see on the top of this dialog, it says program to send posted files to. By default, it's set to notepad. You can set it to another editor. If you have a G code editor that you're using, you can select this button here, 3-dot button, go ahead and locate your executable file for your post editor, and it'll show up in this field right here. And that's the dialog that will pop up whenever you post G code. So if you're not seeing a dialog pop up, if you don't see your G code automatically pop up, check this field up here, make sure that at least it's pointing to Notepad, so it'll pop up in Notepad. And also, here's another checkbox down here called Show Output Dialog when post-processing. If you have this unchecked, it'll just go by default to one of these locations that you have defined here, and it'll pop up the G code file itself. If you have this option checked, it'll pop up a post and save as dialog, similar to saving any type of file. It'll display a dialog, allow you to select a location to put the post to G code file at. So also here, the third item, I need to change the posted file extension. By default, it comes as .nc. Your controller may require a different file extension. It may be a dot something else. So PNG, whatever your extension is. Just go to the CAM preferences dialog, pick the add new button right here next to posted file extension. It'll pop up a little dialog. Enter your file extension .xxx, whatever your extension is, pick OK, and then it'll appear in this list of posted file extensions. Now here's a couple of
there was a good question on upgrades, updates for service pack updates and things like that. Does it get overwritten? Do your posts get overwritten? So yeah.
Typically, if you have a unique, obviously if you edit any of the posts in our install path, do not save it as the same name, because those files are subject to be overwritten. If you use a unique name, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, but I don't believe the uniquely named post will be overwritten when you do a service pack.
I believe that directory, the entire directory will be overwritten. Okay. So yeah, so that's one of the reasons we recommend having a separate folder for your posts, especially if you are not using one of the stock posts and you actually created or edited a new post. We would highly recommend that you use a separate folder somewhere that the installer is not going to look at. So.
Mm-hmm. And if you use a separate folder, shared drive or your desktop, and you have your product already pointing to that folder, when you install an update, I believe, Joe, it gives you an option to load the settings from your previous update, and it'll automatically bring in that folder path for you, and you won't have to do anything.
That's right.
So that takes care of item number 3 here. I need to change the posted file extension. That we talked about that, and then also upgrades, how to keep track of your post. Okay. Now, there is common issues that occur that users sometimes think it's the post that's causing the problem, because anytime anything goes wrong, obviously we're supplying the posted G code to run the machine, but in some cases it's not the G code file that's causing the problem. It could be a machine problem. So we just listed a couple of things. Obviously, there's a lot of things that you know that could go wrong with your machine, but commonly, if you're not seeing the correct accuracy that you think you should be seeing, we're not talking about thousands, you know, of accuracy, you know, shifting one way or the other. We're talking about, you know, if things are noticeably wrong, it's not the right Z height, it's not cutting in the right direction, it's not even in the right area where my stock is or something like that. Some of the things you can check is just do the checklist from your machine for checking the machine accuracy and check your setup itself. When you set up your stock material on your CNC bed of your machine, make sure you set up the program 0 at the exact location that you're setting it up in our CAM file. When you set up the CAM file itself, those positions have to match. So if you have a work 0 in RhinoCam and you got it pointed to one area on your stock, and if you set up your machine and you have your program 0 set up in another location, obviously it's not going to be correct. So make sure those match. Now, there are other issues. Another group of issues that we see a lot has to do with arcs and how arcs are displayed on your controller. If you have a backplot display on your controller, it will look at the file and it'll show the G code graphically on your controller. If you have one of those controllers, if you see some weird things going on, arcs going off in space, and this is obviously something's wrong, go back into your RhinoCam file, your Visual CAD CAM file, and double check your accuracy in your machining operation dialog. Check your global accuracy and also your arc fitting. If you have arcs being fitted, make sure your arc fitting tolerance is 2 times the global tolerance. If your arc fitting tolerance by default is 0.1 and if your global tolerance is 0.001, then you could see some arcs being fitted incorrectly. So if they are fitted incorrectly, in most cases you will see that on the graphic display of the controller. Now, how do you edit the post processor? We're just going to give you a brief, couple of steps how to get into the post process generator dialog. If you look at your select post processor dialog, and this will display when you pick post from the program tab in your CAM plugin. So if you just to load the post process generator, make sure you have the correct post selected from the current post processor list. Pick the edit button to the right of your selected post, and the post processor generator dialog will display. And we'll be looking at this dialog in detail during the demo portion of the webinar. But basically, you have various sections here on the left. Select these sections, and there's dialogues for each one of these areas. So now we're going to talk. What we're going to do on these slides, we're going to talk about the steps to perform a certain task, and then we're going to look at it in the demo, how it's configured in the demo files. So what if you want to add a tool change point? This could come into play if you have, for instance, if you have your clearance plane in your setup. I'm talking about in RhinoCam or any of our CAM plugins. If you have your clearance plane set to say only a ½ inch, okay, when the program is done, it'll retract that clearance plane. Obviously, a ½ inch may not be enough to get your part out of there. You may want to have the tool back up away from the part to a certain height and a certain location. And you can have that output automatically using a tool change point. So over here on the left, just open your machine tool setup dialog. In the machining job tree, you'll see an item in the tree called machine. Just double click on that item. It'll display the machine tool setup dialog, and there's an area here for tool change point. You see here we have the X set to 0, the Y and the Z set to 10. So one thing you do need to make sure that the tool change point is set up in your post processor. So we're looking at the post process generator here in the middle. We're on the tool change tab of the post process generator. And we have two macros, one for the first loaded tool and one for the tool change macro. So these two items need to be set up in your tool change macro in order to set up a tool change point. And you can go back and look at this, watch this video, freeze it at this slide, and if you want to type these in, or if you want to just send us an email, we can help you, guide you do that. And then once it's set up, every time you post an operation with this post, it will post out the tool change point. The tool change point here. Here you see a Z10 defined here in the dialog, and then our X and Y. X is 0, Y is 10, and that will retract it up to 10 units in the Z, and then 0, X, and 10 in the Y. And that's where the tool will go when the program is either completed or if you need to do a tool change.
The other thing you can do, if you always have a fixed tool change point in your machine, you don't even need to set that up in the machine tool setup. You can actually hard code that value in the toolpath editor, and all your output files will inherit it. So that's another way to do it. But this is our recommended way, where you're actually setting it up in the machine tool.
Okay, cutter compensation. This is a topic that we hear about quite often. Cutter compensation, if you don't know what it is, it's just a method of compensating at the controller level at the machine, compensating for wear in your tool, or compensating for first piece inspection. If you're just running your first piece after you do the setup, in most cases that first piece won't be totally accurate. You can make some adjustments at the controller for each tool to move that tool, give it some extra cutting offset, or typically it's in the positive direction, because if you have tool wear, you want to move, you want to increase the diameter of your tool as it's defined in your controller. But there's a number of things that you need to do to get your cutter compensation codes, the G41, G42, and the G40 to turn it off, to come out in your posted G code. And these items are numbered, and we're going to look at that in the demo portion. We're going to show you how that's set up. But if you start, we're going to start with number 1 over here on the top right. Typically, cutter compensation typically is used in 2-axis profiling operations. It can also be used in pocketing, but one thing to keep in mind, compensation will only be enabled on the final pass of your toolpath operation. If you're using profiling and you have a step overset, compensation is not going to be output until you get to the final pass on your on your geometry. It's the same for pocketing. If you're roughing out the pocket, you won't see any compensation being posted. You want to make sure you have a cleanup pass checked for pocketing, and then on that cleanup pass, that's when the compensation will be posted. So in your machining operation dialog, you have compensation parameter in your cut parameters tab. You can set that to control on or auto on, and that will enable cutter compensation to be posted. That just enables it. So another thing you need to make sure is compensation will only be outputted if you have a linear entry. So you need to go to your entry and exit tab, check your entry motion. This says entry motion at the top. There's a number of options you can do here. You need to set it to linear lines and arcs, and make sure the approach motion and the engage motion are set to linear. So in this example, we have a approach length set to 1/4 of an inch. This is the green line here in the image. And then we have an engage motion that's set to linear. that's set to 1/8 of an inch, and that's the magenta motion you see here. So this first motion coming in needs to be linear, and it also can't be a ramp. It can't be a long path, because if you're ramping down to your entry, cutter compensation will not be enabled in that case either. So make sure you're all on the XY plane for your entry, and it's a linear entry. That's number 2. And number 3, you also need to check your tool definition inside of our product. When you define your tool, on the Properties tab over here on the right, you'll see a number of fields called tool number, adjust register, cut com register. Those 3 values need to match the tool number. So if your tool number is 1, the adjust register needs to be 1, the cut com register needs to be 1. Because obviously, if you're telling it to do, on tool number 1, it needs to make sure that it matches up to tool number 1 that you defined. And again, also in the post-process generator, we have a area tab called cutter compensation specifically for this. It has these macros set for cutter compensation left, right, and cutter compensation off. And you'll see 3 different possible G codes. Well, you see a G41, a G42, and a G40 will turn it off. So in a lot of cases, you'll see a G40. If you're enabling cutter compensation, you'll probably see a G40 at the very start of your program. That's just to ensure that it's off. It won't hurt your controller if you already have it off and you tell it to turn it off again. That's perfectly fine. And then when you actually get to the line of code that is your finishing pass, the cutter compensation code will be enabled at that line of motion. And then at the end, you'll see a G40, which will turn it off again. And again, at number 6 is just an example. If you want to enable cutter compensation, we have the entry motion set to linear. So if you look at the yellow line, that's where it's plunging down from the clearance plane. Then you're starting your approach motion in green, and then your magenta motion is your engage. So this needs to be linear. The first approach motion needs to be linear for sure. So if you just set them all to linear, then you won't have a problem. Now you see that there's some arcs in this path. Once you have a linear entry, it's going to stay on till you get to the end. I hope that covers everything on cutter compensation. If you have any questions, obviously cutter compensation is a more complicated topic. If you have questions, you can ask us here, obviously, or you just send us an email to support@mecsoft.com. Okay, another thing that we touched upon this a little bit in the previous slide, things that can go wrong, but we're going to talk about it here as well. Arc circle post formats. If your machine supports arc motions, the GO2s and the GO3s, and you want to enable those so that you get better, if you have arcs enabled, you'll have a better surface finish because it's outputting as an actual arc. The motions will be an arc motion. It won't be a bunch of linear motions that's faceted around a certain arced area. So if you have arc fitting enabled, if you support it in your controller, it's always a good thing to enable it because it'll save on the amount of G code that you're outputting. Obviously, if you see here, you got 1 line of code for an arc. If you don't have arcs enabled, this may end up being 100 lines of linear motions, depending on your global tolerance that you have set for the operation.
I think, hey Don, I don't believe any machines that are shipping today do not have ARC support. So
there may be an older one. There may be an older one.
Yeah, we run very rarely. We run into machines that don't support ARCs. So if your machine doesn't support ARCs, then I think it's time for an upgrade.
Yeah. So let's just go through the steps here to check your ARC output. In step 1, obviously, you want to go into your operation dialog. Every operation dialog I would say 90% of them have a global tolerance. They will all actually all have a tolerance. Some will be in 3 axis, you'll see an intolerance and out tolerance, but in 2 axis, you'll just see one tolerance value. You want to check that tolerance value, and then you want to go, if that operation supports arc fitting, it will be located on the Advanced Cut Parameters tab. You'll see an area called Cut Arc Fitting, and it will have a value for arc fitting tolerance. So we recommend this arc fitting tolerance be 2 times your global tolerance. So in these images, you see we have 1,000 set for the 3-axis in and out tolerance. We have 2,000 set for the arc. If you're concerned about accuracy, if 2,000 is not accurate enough, set your final accuracy in the arc fitting tab, the Advanced Cut Parameters arc fitting tolerance. Set that to be your final tolerance, and then go back into your global tolerance and set that to half of this tolerance. But these two do need to be related as far as what the values are. If you have this arc fitting tolerance set too high, like we mentioned previously, 1 or 2 of these arcs could be way out in space somewhere, or could be interpreted incorrectly. So you want to tighten these tolerances to what you need in the surface finish of your part. So we covered number 1, number 2, setting your tolerances for your arc output. Now, item number 3 on your CAM preferences, there's an area on the output control dialog that is called arc output. And there's a global checkbox here for always output arcs as linear motions. Typically, as Joe mentioned, if it's a relatively new machine, you won't be using this checkbox. So uncheck, make sure that's unchecked. And I believe, Joe, it's unchecked by default. And
yes, it's unchecked by default. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, these 3 checkboxes below, if your controller or your machine supports arcs in each of the 3 principal planes, so you want to make sure each of these are checked. I have run across some users, Joe, where only the XY plane was supported and the ZX or the ZY plane was not supported as far as arc output. So if you have problems and you see a plane code, if you see on your controller that you have an error at a plane code, which is a G17, 18, or 19, I believe, if you see an error at one of those codes, that refers to the plane that the arc is being posted on. So you might want to double check these options here. Now, if you look at number 4 here, obviously that is just the arc motions in the toolpath. If you see dark blue motions, those are arc motions. If you see light cyan colored, like over here in these dialogues, if you see a light blue cyan color, that's a linear motion. That's not an arc motion. So if you want arc fitting, make sure you're looking at blue motions in your G-code file. And you will only see blue motions when there's an arc. If it's a straight line, you won't. It'll just be a light cyan color.
Yeah, that is provided you have not customized the color of the motions. So
yeah.
By default, this is the color that we output.
Good point. So in item number 5, we have a tab in the post-process generator specifically for arcs and circles. So you see the circle item selected on the left. You have G-code values up the top for your clockwise arc and counterclockwise arc. These are your plane codes, as I mentioned, 17, 18, and 19. Typically, you don't want to mess with these because these are standard and set already for you, so don't mess with those. But underneath that, you see arc output format for arcs. You see a lot of options here. It may be that your machine controller expects to see the arc formatted in a certain way. So you look at number 6 here. This is just an example of an arc being formatted out. We have a GO3, and then we have XY. We have an I and a J, no R. So in this case, it's just IJK only. There's no R value listed. So if you need IJK and radius, you would select this option. radius only. There's just a number of different things you can select here. So you need to look at your machine controller manual. If you don't understand the manual, call your machine vendor or the machine manufacturer and ask them to send you detailed instructions on outputting or interpreting arcs for your machine controller. And once you find out what the proper format is, you can go back and make that adjustment here in your post. Or if you still don't understand what the machine tool vendor is telling you and you don't understand what to do here, send us the information from your machine tool vendor and we'll make sure we'll make the appropriate adjustments and send you a post to test. Okay, so I think the arc circle format is covered pretty well. Let's go to drill cycles as linear motions. As Joe mentioned, some machines don't support drill cycles, and by a cycle, I'm referring to a line of code that can be programmed in as a line of code, as pre-programmed in your controller to do certain types of hole making operations, drilling, tapping, boring, etc. So you'll have a CAN cycle code such as a G83, for example, okay, for a deep drill motion. If you don't want the CAN cycle codes being posted out, you can go over here to the CAM preferences dialog, and there's a checkbox here for always output drill cycle motions as linear motions. So if you check that checkbox right here, instead of your CAN cycle code here, you will see just the linear motions output at the beginning of your drill motion. It'll start just as if you drilled it. It'll start at your clearance height, and these Z depths will, in this particular case, I believe we have a deep drill, so it's pecking down in Z, and then it'll retract in Z when it's done. So if you don't want the CAN cycles, you can check this box and it'll bypass those. Joe, if I'm missing anything on any of these, feel free to jump in. I believe this is pretty straightforward. Now, using the programmable post. Obviously, if you've got to have some programming knowledge for Python scripting to take advantage of this. If you do have experience with Python, you'll understand these steps that we're talking about here. If you want to write a Python script, or if you obviously you got to have a Python script written before you set it up in your CAM plugin. We have an example Python script here. Go to your select post processor dialog. You don't want to use the legacy post option. That will be selected by default. Select the use programmable post option. That will enable you to define a Python script as your post. So once the programmable post is defined, just like in the legacy post, you need to tell it where the post script file is located. And once you have it pointing in the right direction, you'll see the Python script listed. And then in step 2, if Rhino actually has a menu item to actually get to Python scripting, because Rhino, as you know, if you know Rhino, it's very good at programming in Python for geometry or whatever. So if you go to the Tools tab in Rhino, just select the Python script, load your script, and you can go ahead and edit it directly from inside of Rhino.
Yeah, it's basically a Python script editor, but you can have your own script editor. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to Rhino. There's a lot of third-party editors out there that are pretty good as well. So,
okay, so what we see here in the middle dialog, this is the Python script editor, and at the top of the script, you will see events. What you can do is you can program events for every event that occurs in the post processor. If you,
hey Don, do you want me to talk about this?
Yeah, you can
Yeah,
do it.
let me talk about this because I have a little bit more knowledge on this. What this Python programming system is a event-driven architecture, if you will. It's been designed as an event-driven architecture. So what that means is when the system is cycling through the internal toolpath, every time it hits a certain interesting item, for instance, a tool change, that would be a very interesting thing that you want to handle. That will be treated as an event. And so when the toolpath hits, or rather the toolpath as it's cycling, the system as it's cycling to the internal toolpath hits rapid motion, that'll be considered an event. So whenever there's something interesting happening in the toolpath, an event will be triggered. And what Don is showing here on the right side, the third, where it's labeled number 4, that's the help file that lists all the events that are handled. So for instance, if you look at the event, when the spindle speed, on spindle speed is an event. So whenever in the toolpath, you're setting the spindle speed, in the feeds and speeds dialog, you set up a spindle speed, and it's written out to the toolpath. And as the system is posting, when it hits that spindle speed line in the toolpath, it'll trigger that event. And then when that event is triggered, in your Python script, you can handle that event in any which way you want. So that's what the item that's labeled number 3 displays. There's on rapid motion as the event that's being handled. And there we're doing certain things. We're actually counting. In this particular case, we're actually counting the number of linear motions that were being output. We're incrementing it. And then we're actually outputting the format. We're creating the format that we want to output. So that's what that event does. So this way we can control the output based on all the various events that we encounter as the system is traversing the internal toolpath. So it's a very powerful system. There's lots of neat things we can do because the Python programming architecture expands the scope of what we can actually do with this post processors. But at the same time, with all that power, it is quite complex. So we wouldn't recommend you to start looking at writing your own Python posts. Obviously, we don't offer support for Python programming, as you can imagine. We're not, I mean, we can get swamped with the Python post support. So what we typically do is if you need something out of the ordinary that we cannot handle with our SPM or legacy posts, that would be considered a candidate for the Python programming post. That's where we would write a programmable post, and you can talk to us, and then we can help you write one. And it's actually a paid service. The Python post, we will write one, make sure it works on your machine, and get that installed. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the Python programmable post that we have in 2022. All right, Don.
And again, as Joe mentioned, if you got any questions about this, just you can ask us now. We're actually running a little late, Joe, so I'm going to get right into the demo here. This slide here just talks about a number of resources that you can get access to from the product. From the help, you can open up a resource guide. There's all kinds of things in here. Just come back and watch the video again and freeze it here, and you can learn how to access this information. Okay, so we're going to do a short demo, or I'm going to go through and tell you or show you how these different things we talk about are set up. Generically, if you want to set up your post, if you just install the program and you don't understand quite everything yet, I keep mentioning about go to the program tab and select post. So we've got the program tab and the simulate tab. We have a post option here. Select that and you'll see the select post processor dialog. The two options here, use a legacy post. In most cases, that's where it'll be set to. If you're using a programmable post, obviously you want to select this option. Down below that, you can select the current post processor, and is being pulled from this folder location right here. We have it set to a specific folder right now where we're using the post from for this a webinar. If you in your product, it'll be a default location. If you want to change that location, just pick this button and it'll pop up a dialog, and you can select a different your desktop or a network drive, wherever you want to point it to. But your post definition files or your Python scripts need to be in this folder that you're pointing it to. If it's not, you won't be able to find it. So it doesn't matter which one you're using, you do have to have it in this folder that's defined right here. And then also for CAM preferences as related to interface, let's go to the interface. We can talk about this a little bit. This is some new options that you may not see yet, so I'm just going to skip over these for now and go to the post processor tab. In 2022, we changed where the options are. Previously, most of these options were on the post definition dialog, so we moved them over because we added some more options. So we moved them over into the preferences dialog, and we have a post processor tab. So again, I mentioned the program to send the posted file to. Make sure this is pointing to where you want your posted files displayed in. It should default to Notepad, or you can change it to whatever script or program that you use to program or display your G-code. But then we just have some options for how the automatic naming options for your posted G-code. Here, if you want to change the file extension, if your extension is not in the list, you can just pick this button, enter your extension, pick OK, and it'll show up in the list. Also, this option here, show output dialog when posting. I mentioned if you have this checked and you post, you'll see a post and save as dialog, and that'll give you an option to change the location where you're posting to, or if you want to change the name of the post, etc. Check this box and you'll give you an opportunity to do so. And then here we mentioned we added a new option that you can automatically generate your G-code when you generate your toolpath operations. With this checked, you can this G-code item, the G-code will generate automatically when you generate your operation. Okay, installing a custom post. Let's go up here to the post tab. If you have like we've talked through this entire hour here about where are your post definition files. You need to know where they are. If you don't know where they are, you need to ask us, and we'll tell you where they are by default. But if you don't know where they are by default, just open this dialog and this folder to load post processor files from. This path will point to the location of where the 300 or so posts are located in the file browser inside of Windows. So if you installing a custom post, you may have placed it in a different location, such as your desktop or whatever. We've got a different location assigned here for the post that we're using for this webinar. So you just pick the 3 buttons. It'll come up with a post folder dialog. You can navigate through this to get to the exact folder where your post processor files are. So put your custom post in that folder, point RhinoCam to that folder here, and pick OK, and then your post will show up in this list. Okay. So how to add a tool change point. You'll see in where we mentioned previously, you have to enable it in the machine definition. So we're going to pick machine. Here is the tool change point fields under general parameters. You have a field for X, Y, and Z, and you can use a pick button if you want to select a point from your geometry to tell it where to go. So those coordinates will be mapped to the dialog. Once you're set there, you want to go into your post processor, and we have our post we're using, our custom post here defined. We're going to pick edit, and we're going to go to the tool change tab, and you'll see fields here for tool change points right here. So that's defining what that's doing. It's telling it when the program posts to go and get these values from the machine definition dialog and use those to define your tool change point. And then when you post out, you'll see those coordinates posted. Okay, Joe, interrupt me if we got any questions. I'm going to go through a little bit quick on the remaining
can you
items.
post it and show the code?
Yes,
that's important.
Yes. Let's go ahead and post. So if we just go, let's do a find. Let's do find the letter T. Get through the tool list here. So here is our first tool change. You'll see we set it to Z 10 inches, X and Y, X 0 and Y 10 inches. These values right here are correlate to what you define on your machine tool definition dialog, and they will be outposted for each tool change. Okay, let's move on here. Cutter compensation. I'm just going to show you, the different things that we covered. You want to make sure that you have linear motions defined. Initially, obviously, turn on compensation in your operation dialog. Make sure that's set to control on or auto on, and go to your. Just one second. Go to your. Let's see right here. Make sure that's turned on, and then also let's see here from the tool definition dialog. You want to make sure that this value here, the CUTCOM register, is the same as the tool number. Okay, those have to be the same in order for CUTCOM to be posted out.
Well, not necessarily. They don't have to be the same, but general convention is the registers will have to be the same. But you can have a CUTCOM register that's different than the tool number. Typically not done, but if you need that freedom, our system allows you to do it.
Yeah.
So
in most cases, by default, when you're at the controller, it'll be, if you're going to do an offset, you're selecting a tool number by default. Probably that's where it's going to be. If it, like Joe mentioned, if it's different, you can obviously override that at the controller. Okay, so let's take a look at the G-code editor. We're going to edit our post, and we're going to go cutter compensation, and we have codes for cutter compensation left, right, and cutter compensation off. And let's go ahead and post this so we can see. Let's make sure this is set. Control on. Let's go ahead and post. And let's look for a G40. Up here is turning it off initially. And then we have a G42, which is enabling it here. And if we do a search, find another G42, let's see if it finds another one. And let's just do a G40. I should go to the end and turning it off here. And there should be, okay, so it's used just in the profiling operation here. It's enabled in the beginning. It's set here for the finishing pass of the profiling operation. Then it's turned off at the end of that operation. Okay, ARC formats. We mentioned in the operations, if you want to output ARC formats in the cut parameters tab, you have a tolerance. Okay, if you look at this dialog right here, by default, without fitting arcs, you have linear motions. That's the light blue motions here, the cyan color. If you want to fit arcs, you want to go to the Advanced Cut Parameters tab under Cut Arc Fitting. Check this box and give it an arc fitting tolerance, which by as a rule should be 2 times your global tolerance, and a blue motion will be posted out. Arc motion will be posted out instead of a light cyan color. And then also in the posted G code, if you want to edit the post and look for circle, these are the different options for outputting your ARC outputs, your GO2s and your GO3s. If you're getting an error on your controller at a line and it has a GO2 or GO3, it's related to one of these options in the post definition here. So typically you can, what we recommend is you contact your machine vendor, find out what the format is, look it up in the manual, see what needs to be defined as. If you don't understand it, send us that information and we'll make the required change in your post for you. Now, cycles as drill cycles as linear motions real quick. We're going to go to preferences, control output control. And there's a checkbox here for always output drill cycles motions as linear motions. So if you have this checked, you won't see a canned cycle such as a G83, whatever the canned cycle is for that you're outputting for your holes. You won't see that canned motion. What you'll see is just linear motions defining each one of these motions here. You don't see it here. Let's slow this down. Let's turn this off. So you'll have linear motions for each one of the drill cycle motions that you see. Any questions, Joe? That believes it wraps it up. Okay, let me check. Looks like Joe has his mic muted. Let me just double check, look at the questions here.
Oh, yeah. And actually, not too many questions. Let's talk about the programmable post really quickly, if you
Okay.
want to.
Okay. So
if you want to load that part down, that'll be good.
Okay, yeah. Let's go load the file for the programmable post.
Yeah, so what we want to show you here is a 5-axis post that we written for an Italian machine tool maker called Bacchi. And this is for a post processor that does index machining. So if you just want to show the toolpaths on Flatland and then go down and display the toolpaths for each of the operations.
Okay.
So people.
So let's go to the post.
Just select, just select the operations. I want to see the toolpath. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, that's the toolpath over there. Yeah, and then we're doing a sort of like a profile operation around that part. And this is done in 3-axis. And then we are indexing. And then we're, on the other side, we're doing the pocketing after index machining. So if you want to open the post processor dialog, and we can show them how it's set up. Here we are doing we have selected the use programmable post rather than the legacy post. And then we have selected the Bacchi post there. And then, just post it. Just post an opera.
The entire setup?
You can post the whole thing.
There we go.
So no. Okay, so here this particular post had a special challenge because once you set the setup properly or oriented the setup, the G-code motions had to use U and V for X and Y. I mean, you can see the UVW for XYZ, while if it's in the standard operation mode, then you normally would use X, Y, and Z. So this was not being, we could not handle this in our legacy post because most machines use X. I mean, almost all machines we run into use X, Y, and Z. So we had to write this special post that creates the only in the rotated setups we output toolpath motions as U, V, and W. So this is an example of where you would use programmable post, something special like this. So yeah, I think we run out of time. So if one thing I also wanted to note is if you have any special requirements, always drop us an email and support. And we do, some of these can get pretty complex, and so these are paid services. Apart from actually the amount of what you paid for the product, these are extra services that we will charge for you. So obviously, the more work we do, we need to get paid for that as well. So I just wanted to put that out to make sure that these are not easy. These require experienced developer to look at and output. So. But that gives you an idea of the capabilities of the system. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll be in touch next month.
See you later, guys. Take care.